There exists a disturbing theory called quantum immortality. Building on the foundations of quantum mechanics, Max Tegmark, a Swedish-American physicist, proposed that an individual's consciousness might not end with the physical death of the body, but could instead transition to a different timeline or parallel universe where the individual continues to live. Here are two true stories from Reddit in which people have supposedly experienced this disturbing phenomenon. 3 years ago, a Reddit user posted this: "I have for sure died twice, quite possibly 4 times. Of the two, I'm very confident in the first one happened in about 1998 and the other in 2018 or so. In the first instance, my best friend and I were driving gravel back roads in the middle of the night, 40 miles between towns in rural South Dakota. I was admittedly going far too fast, and we came over a small rise, and there was a T in the road where you could turn left or right, but straight forward was a driveway for a farmhouse. The driveway went for about a half a block or so, and then transitioned into a cornfield. I remember saying, 'Oh fuck,' and starting to slow down as we started flying through the very tall corn. It was late summer, and the corn stalks were basically full grown. The sound as my car plowed over the corn stalks and into the field sounded like the most vicious hailstorm ever. The experience was completely overwhelming to the senses. The sights and sounds of flying headlong at high speeds into a fully grown, densely planted cornfield cannot be overstated. This is where things get weird. The next thing I remember was sitting at a stop sign where we would turn onto the main highway in the area. It was nearly completely silent, with only the light hum of the engine creating any sound. This was at least several miles away from the field we had just flown into. My blinker was on to the left, and the car was just sitting still with my foot on the brakes. The lack of motion and dead silence was, for reasons unknown, also absolutely overwhelming. I felt extremely disoriented and discombobulated, and was honestly not certain how I had come to this point, and was even concerned that perhaps I had blacked out, or something. I just was not certain how we had arrived where we were currently sitting. At this point, I did not remember flying through that intersection or crashing through the cornfield. That memory was gone, either blocked or unremembered. I looked over at my friend and again said, "What the fuck?" He had a dumbfounded look on his face as well, and shrugged his shoulders, and after a moment said, "I think we go left." I actually got out of the car and found the Northern Star to make sure we would be turning the correct direction onto the highway. I also surveyed the situation, grasping for some semblance of understanding. We were surprisingly close to the town I lived in at the time. In short order, we made it to my apartment and both crashed as it was 4 o'clock in the morning and we had had a very long day. I was dead sober for this entire experience, but I did not feel right and I knew something was amiss. We got up the next day about mid-morning and got back in my car to drive to my friend's town where he was attending college, which was going to be about a 5-hour drive. We needed gas, and I stopped at a station to fill up and get other miscellaneous supplies. My car I was driving at the time was old enough to be using a bit of oil, so I almost always checked the oil. Again, at this moment, my memories of the cornfield and all that were completely gone. I popped the hood and went around to the front of the car to get at the engine. I lifted the hood and glanced down. I have never been so absolutely baffled and immediately enlightened at the same time. A light breeze would have knocked me over. The engine compartment was almost completely chock full of corn stalks. My knees went weak. Once again, I very loudly and firmly proclaimed, "What the fuck?" and called to my friend so he would come around to the front of the car. The very instant I saw the corn stalks in the engine compartment, the entire accident flashbacked to me. I don't remember the point of death, but I remember all the other details, including being very confused sitting at the stop sign by the highway, and the brutal contrast between flying through the field and sitting still at the stop sign. My friend said to me, "Do you remember?" I said, "Yeah." We talked it over multiple times during our long drive, and we had the exact same memories. His memory also returned to him the second he saw the corn in the car as well. A couple months later, I tried to drive the same back roads that we had been driving to find that intersection, and the farmhouse, and the driveway, and the cornfield. There were a couple of very unique specific details to the location, where the accident happened, that should have made it very easy to recognize and find. I was never able to locate a spot like this on any of the roads anywhere around where we would have been driving. Microsoft had also just released their satellite imagery, and I scoured everywhere between those two cities, and I have never ever been able to find the location where we had our accident. I honestly don't think it exists on this timeline. The other time I was out in the middle of the night again, in a very rural area during a thunderstorm to take lightning photos. I'm pretty sure that I saw the lightning bolt that killed me prior to my timeline jump. I remember sitting in the car and finishing my styrofoam cup of gas station coffee and hopping out of the car to smoke a cigarette and go pee on the gravel road. Most of the lightning was several miles to the west, and it wasn't even actually raining where I was parked. I was not worried about lightning safety at this point. Now, the very large power lines that take electricity to the town I was living in were right by this road. I've been pretty close to a couple of lightning strikes. I'm no stranger. I remember getting that very powerful static feeling, and the hair on my head and on my arms started to stand up. I knew what was coming. I started to say, "Oh fuck," reached for the door handle, and before I could even get my profanity out, I remember a profoundly huge snap sound and a blinding white light. The next thing I remember was sitting in my parked car with my nearly full cup of coffee in my hand. I remember thinking that I wanted to smoke a cigarette and I needed to go pee, so I chugged the lukewarm coffee and started to get out of the car. The second my feet hit the ground, I felt the most massive wave of déjà vu I have ever experienced. I nervously glanced up beside the road to look at the power lines, but the spot I had stopped previously was about a mile down the road, and the power lines had turned a corner and not followed the road down to this point. I glanced down the road to what I thought was the spot I had previously been in, and just as I looked down the road, lightning struck the power line in multiple massive flashes, and I even saw the lightning bolt jump down to the ground under the power line. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I witnessed the very lightning bolt that killed me. Okay, what follows is hard for me to put to words. I want to tell you about what I've experienced, because I'm not sure most people who've been through this ever try telling anyone. Last week, I lived in a slightly different universe where I killed myself, and I awoke to find myself here in this universe. I'm certain now that killing oneself will not provide the escape from reality that a person wants, and instead, we are destined to keep jumping over to the next closest universe in which we survived. Let me start from the beginning. 2 years ago, my sister's husband took his own life. They had been together for 10 years, and he was like a brother to me. Losing him was one of the most traumatic things that has ever happened in our family. Only a few weeks after his suicide, that's when my wife and I got married. Beginning a marriage while grieving the suicide of a family member is not a great way to forge a lasting relationship. I tried my hardest to be a good husband, but my grief was more than my wife could bear, and after only about a year of marriage, she told me she wanted a divorce. Last summer, after we split up, that's when I first attempted to take my own life. I was hospitalized, diagnosed with acute persistent depression, prescribed antidepressant medication, released, got a new place on my own, and I began seeing a therapist. The next few months had glimmers of hope here and there, but I thought about dying every day. I just wanted to stop existing, and if I had to exist, I wanted to live in a radically different world where none of the events of the last few years had ever taken place. After a while, I stopped going to therapy, I stopped taking my meds, and I got worse and worse. Eventually, the clinic called and asked me why I hadn't refilled my medication recently, and they asked that I come in to speak with the psychiatrist. I agreed and made an appointment for last Thursday. On Thursday of last week, I met with my psychiatrist, and when asked how I was doing, I had to be honest and say that I was not doing well at all. When asked when the last time was that I had thought about wanting to die, I said, today and every day prior, but let them know that I didn't want to cause any harm to my family, so I did not have a plan, and that my wish for death had more to do with hoping I would die in some accident rather than actually taking my own life. They locked the door, and I very nearly got hospitalized for a second time. I assured them, over and over, that I was not planning on taking my own life, and they had me sign a contract stating that I wouldn't. They then refilled my medication and sent me on my way. Leaving the clinic that day, I felt as though I could never go back. Getting locked up in the mental hospital again was the last thing I'd ever want, and I've known since my first attempt that if I decide to, I'd need to make sure no one is able to stop me. Friday morning, I woke up feeling like I had reached my limit. I couldn't go on, and I couldn't risk getting locked up again. I bought a bottle of whiskey and proceeded to get really drunk. Friday evening, I had made peace with the idea of making my exit. I finished the whiskey, chugged a bottle of NyQuil, swallowed all of my antidepressants, swallowed all of the sodium tablets that I had, and laid down to sleep. I began to get drowsy immediately, and I thought to myself, it's time to find out if there's anything on the other side. And I quickly passed out of consciousness. The next thing I knew, I was helping to set up a pair of gaming computers, sitting side by side on a desk in a house that seemed familiar, yet unfamiliar. The person I was helping to set these up was a friend from high school I hadn't seen in 15 years, named Jim. I took a step back and looked at the monitors on these two identical gaming rigs. They were easily 36 inches diagonally each, but the peculiar thing about them was that they had a 4:3 aspect ratio instead of the 16:9 widescreen we're used to. We booted the machines up and played a little bit of this third-person jetpack flying game. I realized that sitting close to these monitors, they took up most of my field of view, yet the pixel density was incredibly crisp and the refresh rate was really good. These are quite the monitors. Sitting close to them, it feels almost as immersive as VR. I commented to Jim. Yeah, they'll do in a pinch, but there's still no EnviroView. Still no what now? Centac. EnviroView. Are you joking? Jim asked me. I gave him a blank stare. He sighed. All right, come on. He motioned for me to walk over to the entertainment center in the center of the room. He pressed a button on a game console situated beneath a TV, fiddled with his phone, and said to me, "Okay, enter your PIN." Again, I stared blankly, not sure what he was asking me to do. "Get out your phone and enter your PIN. Do you want to play or what?" I fished my phone out of my pocket, seeing a notification window with a number pad displayed. I entered my ATM PIN number, and it worked. Immediately, a holographic sphere began to project all around the two of us, emanating from the game console, displaying a crystal clear scene of beaches, mountains, montages of newscasters, and different scenes playing in a stream of windows. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was in sheer awe. I glanced over at Jim, who was pleased with the scenery but not nearly bowled over, and he asked me something that I don't quite remember and I don't think I quite heard. I blurted out, "How can this be possible? This is going to blow the Oculus Rift and Microsoft HoloLens out of the water." "What are you talking about?" asked Jim. "The Rift, HoloLens. This can't exist yet. We're not there yet. This isn't real. This can't be real." Then I remembered my dog. "Where's Jack? Where's my dog, Jack? Are you feeling okay?" I felt overcome with vertigo and I squatted on the floor, clutching my head in my hands. Where am I? What am I doing here? This can't be real. This isn't my life. The world faded to black as I passed out. Saturday morning, I woke up, back in the bed I was used to, feeling groggy. I got out of bed, wiping the sleep from my eyes. I needed to take my dog outside for his morning bathroom break, as is the usual routine. As I pulled my clothes on, I glanced at my bed and saw that my dog had gotten muddy paw prints all over my covers. That's odd, I thought to myself. When did he get mud on his paws? I couldn't recall it having rained any time in the last few days, and I certainly would have noticed my dog getting mud on my comforter. I walked into my living room and saw that there were muddy paw prints everywhere. At what point yesterday did my dog get mud all over the place, and why didn't I clean it up? Still groggy and still slowly waking up, I recalled the previous dark day. I drank an entire bottle of whiskey and swallowed all of my pills. I looked to the side of the couch where I had left the whiskey bottle, but instead, there were 5 empty beer bottles. I didn't get beer yesterday. I got whiskey, I thought to myself. I went to my bathroom and checked my medicine cabinet. The NyQuil was still full. My medication bottle was still mostly full. What the fuck? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I took my dog to the backyard and the cable which had normally been strung up over the fence in my backyard was lying on the ground. I figured it must have gotten knocked down by some strong wind or something during the night. But when I got closer, I saw that portions of cable were covered in old leaves and grass clippings, as though the cable had been laying on the ground for months. My dog finished doing his business, and we came back inside. I began to retrace the events of the previous day, and I recalled the dream I had the previous night. What I'm seeing and feeling right now feels real. It's a little off, but this feels like real life. I tried to reassure myself as I scrubbed the muddy paw prints from the carpet. Paw prints that I had no recollection of having ever been there, from an apparent rainstorm a few days prior that I could not recall. I had no hangover. I was not feeling sick in the slightest. I could not make heads or tails of what was going on. A handful of beers couldn't be enough to make me imagine an entire scenario that never occurred. I tried to put it out of my mind, and I spent the rest of Saturday afternoon watching Anthony Bourdain on Netflix. Sunday afternoon, my sister came over and we took my dog to the dog park. Upon seeing me, she did a double take. "You're looking good. What's different about you? Did you get a haircut? Have you been eating better?" "No, nothing's different. Nothing I can think of." While at the dog park, she told me all about how on Thursday, the sister of her late husband had said some really cruel things to her over Facebook, blaming her for his death, and how she had spent the last few days just barely clinging on to life. I didn't say anything to her about what I had just been through since Thursday, but the thought occurred to me that had I taken my own life in that time, that would have added another whole level of horrible trauma to what she was already going through. Instead, I told her about spending most of Saturday watching Anthony Bourdain, and how seeing him travel the world makes me feel like there are things in life worth seeing and doing, rather than feeling like the world is just full of misery. Monday morning, I decided to check my calendar to plan out the rest of my week. As of the week prior, I had two important things happening. On Tuesday night, I had agreed to go to a trivia night at a bar with a woman I met at the dog park 2 weeks prior, and on Thursday, I was supposed to chaperone a field trip for my niece. I opened my calendar, and I saw that Tuesday was wide open, and instead, I was going to be attending a dinner theater event with the woman I had met at the dog park. I didn't recall ever having changed those plans. Next, I called up my sister and asked her what time I should drop by her house on Thursday for my niece's field trip. My sister informed me that it was too late in the year for the school to consider me as a volunteer for the trip, despite the fact that the week previously this was something that was already approved. Monday night, still trying to put all of the inconsistencies out of my head, I decided to re-watch Season 4 of Louie on Netflix. Last summer, I watched all of Season 4 one night, while my then-wife had been severely drunk and vomiting all over the bathroom the whole evening. I'd watch the show, go in and check on her for a while, let her sleep on the floor, and go back to watching the show. The next day, she was upset that I went ahead and watched the whole season without her. So on Monday night, I proceeded to watch the first few episodes, and I enjoyed the show with mixed feelings, remembering how awful my marriage had been. But a few episodes in, suddenly I was seeing episodes I had no recollection of having watched before. The entire plot arc where Louis catches his daughter smoking pot, and then he flashes back to his own childhood experiences with marijuana I had never seen before. I couldn't understand how I had missed a huge chunk of the season when I knew that I had watched all of Season 4 last summer. The fact that I went ahead, watched it all without my wife, was a thing that she got mad at me about after the fact. But Louis, as I know it now, is different than it was. This morning, I dropped by my other sister's office to help her with some IT issues that she had been struggling with. As soon as I got there, the first words out of her mouth were, "What's different about you? Did you get a haircut?" So it's Tuesday evening now, and I think I have an understanding of what happened since Thursday. I fully recognize that saying this sounds insane. It sounds delusional. It might very well be delusional. But here's what I think happened. I think that I did kill myself last Thursday. I think that I drank a bottle of whiskey, a bottle of NyQuil, a bottle of antidepressants, and a bottle of salt tablets. I think that briefly, my consciousness joined with an alternate me in a radically different reality. One in which the events of the last 15 years of my life were completely different, and apparently many things in the world were different. but they were so different from what I knew that I couldn't manage to latch onto that reality and stay there. Then, my consciousness became unstuck and snapped back to the next closest reality to the one that I left. And I woke up in a world very much like the one I left, with a few slight differences. Apparently, it had rained here, and my dog tracked mud throughout my apartment. Apparently, the cable in my backyard had been on the ground for months instead of being strung up through the fence like I was used to. Apparently, a huge chunk of Season 4 of Louie is made up of episodes that I have no recollection of seeing before, despite knowing that I watched the whole season prior. And apparently, everyone who knows me says there's something different about me that they can't quite put their finger on. So I think that I killed myself, and instead of getting to be released from the life that I desperately wanted to escape, I merged with the next closest alternate version of myself who still is in basically the same shitty circumstance I was trying to avoid, but with only some slight differences. I think about the universe I left, and I feel a deep sense of shame for the pain that I caused my family back there. It's like somewhere in the periphery of my perception, there's a throbbing, aching grief. And as I walk around in my life here right now, I know that the experience of being alive is not something that I even have the option of trying to quit. I've tried it twice now. The first time I was saved, and the second time, I'm pretty sure I succeeded but still got forced into living again. I think about my sister's late husband, and I remember the grief we all felt when he took himself away from us. And I think, even though I myself will never see him again, I bet there's a version of him in another universe who tried to kill himself, and basically failed, and saw that he can't escape life either. So if life is inescapable, I guess I have to just keep on playing. Instead of experiencing a catastrophe, I'm destined to keep having at the worst a series of near misses, like every meteor that comes close to wiping out all of civilization, but missing by just that much.